Oh my goodness, there is a storm brewing in Canada right now, and it seems like it's happened overnight. We've got politicians speaking out, we've got countless petitions being made, and even just yesterday, a popular YouTuber right here in Canada, JJ McCullough, well, he released a video and it received 70,000 views in just one day all about this issue, and in Canada, 70,000 views in a day is a pretty big number. And it all started with a bill that was introduced way back in November of 2020 by the Liberal government in an effort to level the playing field for Canadian content in a digital age. And it started out as a way to get these big platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus and even YouTube to adhere to some strict Canadian content guidelines, which could dramatically change what content Canadian viewers are funneled towards, potentially adding more funding for Canadian content. But now, with some changes that are happening behind the scenes at political committee meetings, it seems that some changes are being made to the bill that would have this bill actually apply to individual Canadians who are posting on these platforms, be it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, or even TikTok. And many critics believe that this leads to a future where posts made by me and you could arbitrarily be removed based on guidelines that we just don't have information on yet. Now, of course, this is stoking the fires of the debate that has been going on for decades about freedom of speech, and it's even led to a Toronto Sun front page today saying, with dangerous bill C-10, the most anti-internet government in Canadian history, angles for full censorship powers over the web. Now, the Sun tends to be a little bit extreme with their headlines, but in today's video, we're going to go over the response from different politicians on this bill, why some people think that it's a good thing for Canada's future, why some people think this is the worst thing to ever happen to Canada, and we're actually going to go inside the bill to take a look at the clause in the amendment that could be deleted that's causing for this freedom of speech concern. But before we do, if you're new to the channel, hey, how's it going? My name's Russell. We cover a whole bunch of different Canadian content here on the channel, so if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to keep on supporting Canadian content on the YouTube platform, and if you haven't already done so, check out the link in the description for the Canadian Money Mastery Program, where we teach everything that you should have been taught in high school about money, and you can get 45% off of that with coupon code INVEST. All right, let's get into this information. Let's start with a little bit of context. Canada already has an agency called the CRTC, and that essentially forces radio stations and television stations here in Canada to devote a certain percentage of their content to airing Canadian content only. This is why you hear so much of Drake in The Weeknd on the radio, right? Because they have to play a certain amount of Canadian content, and that fits those guidelines. Now, the minister responsible for this Bill C-10, Stephen Guilbeault, well, he thinks that this kind of regulation should be expanded to the internet now to sort of catch up with the digital age that we're now living in. But there are some major problems that have come up inside of this bill because the bill doesn't actually say how this regulation is going to be done. It just gives a whole bunch of power to the CRTC to make those decisions down the road. Let me show you a clip from a press conference when this bill was originally released.
We're asking these large and wealthy companies to invest in Canadian stories, in Canadian music, in Canadian artists, in the same way Canadian companies like Bell, like CBC, like Chorus, like so many others already have regulatory spending obligations in Canada. It's not on a voluntary basis whether or not they want to invest in Canadian stories, in Francophone stories, in Indigenous stories. In terms of exactly how this will happen, we will be asking the CRTC to hold hearings and to determine the exact mechanisms by which you were asking about funds in your question. So we will be asking the CRTC to determine the exact ways this will take place.
So you don't know, there won't be quotas? Like, for example, there's a quota for Canadian content on radio stations. Will that similar quota be levied on international web streaming services or foreign web streaming services here in Canada? And I understand there's also, just to talk about content, that definition of what Canadian content is changing within this legislation. Perhaps you could expand on what that will mean for people that are producing this content.
In terms of the definition, I mean, we will be asking the CRTC to look at this. This is not something that we're doing in the bill, but we will be asking the CRTC to look into this.
So the bill doesn't include exactly how this content would be regulated online. It just gives the CRTC the power to make these regulations without actually having to work through the House of Commons and through the legislative process. Now already that's a potential problem because, as I always like to say here on the channel, the devil really is in the details with any program or government change, right? Even if you think you have the best idea in the world, it depends on how that's going to be implemented, and it certainly can be a dangerous road to go down if we're making decisions on policies for rules and information that we don't actually have yet. And the NDP actually echo this concern in the press conference that was actually a response to the one we just watched.
It looks like the minister are telling CRTC to do his job. You know, what will be the new system? No idea, no details, no evaluation of how much it will provide, who will provide it, and exactly how it, like, you know, if I'm talking hockey, you're taking the puck and you're pushing it to a CRTC. It's saying, figure out something. This is not serious.
Now, Conservatives are starting to point out their concerns when it comes to a freedom of speech standpoint, especially given the deletion of a certain clause that would have formally allowed for individual Canadians not to be affected by this. Now that's being deleted in a committee stage, but before we get into that, the NDP have some additional concerns. They're actually worried that this bill doesn't do enough to protect local Canadian content, local Canadian news from these digital players like Facebook, who are largely gobbling up all of the ad revenue that would have traditionally gone to these more local players. Let me show you this clip.
The biggest concern is that it again doesn't do what the Liberals have said that they would do. We've been waiting for years for the government to actually act and protect media in this country. So the fact that we aren't protecting our local Canadian media is hugely concerning. And then, of course, and I think I've discussed this earlier, this very close connection between the minister's staff and Facebook is hugely problematic. And it looks very much to me like the lobbying that we've seen through Facebook to the minister's staff and minister's office has been successful, and they have not been held to account. So it's deeply problematic in a number of fronts, not just one.
So not only are they worried that this bill doesn't actually do enough to protect local media, well, she also insinuates that there could be some connections between this Liberal minister's office and a connection to Facebook, saying that maybe there was some lobbying done by Facebook so that they wouldn't be as heavily included in this bill, forcing them to pay their fair share, a large NDP talking point saying they want to get these big global corporations to pay their fair share here in Canada. But now this is where things get interesting. In the committee phase of this legislation. Now, if you don't know a lot about the legislative process, it needs to go through first reading in the House of Commons and second reading in the House of Commons, and then they take it to a committee. Now, inside of this committee, they can make amendments and changes to the bill before bringing it back to third reading, where it could finally actually become legislation. Now, in this committee phase, there's been a clause that has been deleted that would have previously exempted individual Canadians posting on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and these social media platforms from these regulations. Let me show you a clip from Pierre Poilievre, who's a largely hated MP, but also loved by just as many people. Very controversial. Let me show you what he has to say since this potential deletion of the clause.
Originally, they said that the posts that everyday people like you and I did on our social media and on YouTube and elsewhere would be excluded by a specific exemption contained in the bill. Well, that was until quite recently, when Liberals showed up at a parliamentary committee and quietly amended the bill to remove the exemption and put the bill in charge of the posts that you and I would make. Now, this, of course, is an attack on freedom of expression.
And now it seems that Conservatives are really picking up this bill as a pressure point, because not just Pierre Poilievre putting out this post, but just as I'm making this video, I checked Twitter, and it seems Erin O'Toole has produced a full 1-minute video, very high production quality, going against this bill, saying, hey, this is attacking Canadians' rights and freedoms. So it seems like the Conservatives are really starting to take up opposition to this bill based on this deletion of the clause that would have exempted individual Canadians from posting on Facebook, Twitter, and all of these other platforms. So of course this got me a little bit curious on what this clause actually was. So I've actually found the bill itself, and I'm going to show you the clause that they're referring to here. Now it's this exclusion clause you might see here. I'm going to zoom in here for you so you can see it a little more closely. They say exclusion carrying on broadcasting undertaking. Let me read you exactly what this text is, and then we'll break it down. They say a person who uses a social media service to upload programs for transmission over the internet and reception by other users of the service, and who is not the provider of the service or the provider's affiliate or the agent or mandatory of either of them does not, by the fact of that use, carry on a broadcasting undertaking for the purposes of this act. Now, this is significant, and this is likely the clause that was deleted in this committee stage, but this is significant because it essentially exempts individuals from being considered taking on a broadcasting undertaking. Now, if this clause is deleted, well, the arguments could be made that individuals posting on Facebook, well, they would be contributing to a broadcasting undertaking and could fall underneath the regulations of this bill. Now, it's clear that the Conservatives are certainly coming out against this bill, saying that it really infringes on the rights of Canadians and it could give the government power to arbitrarily take down someone's post if it's not deemed Canadian enough, right? This is the concern that they're voicing, Aaron O'Toole, Pierre Poilievre, and the Conservative Party at large. But there's also some support out there for this bill, saying that these powers could give the government the ability to get rid of misinformation on the internet, something that's really in the limelight right now, given the past American political elections, as well as the spreading of misinformation, which is a large concern on these large digital platforms. And Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, well, they've indicated that they may be willing to provide the votes that would be necessary to get this passed through the House of Commons. Let me show you what they said recently. Jagmeet Singh said, "We will take a close look at the amendments and a close look at the bill before giving our final position." And he said, adding that the NDP supports measures to target online hate. So again, that's sort of speaking to this view that this bill is actually targeted against online hate so that these posts could be taken down without going through the lengthy process that you have to go through Facebook in order to get these posts down if you think that they are against the community guidelines from those digital platforms. And they say those measures will actually be tackled in a separate bill. This is just on the National Post article. But then the party's deputy critic for Heritage went further, saying in a follow-up that the party's priority is to level the playing field between the web giants and Canadian companies. She added that the NDP will always stand up for freedom of expression, and we will ensure as this bill goes forward that the government presents a strong plan to defend it in the context of the new law. So they're saying, hey, we like the idea of Canadians being on an equal footing when it comes to competing against these giant companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, right? But what they're saying here is that they are going to keep an eye out for any issues with freedom of speech, right? So it's a little bit up in the air right now which way the NDP is going to lean and whether or not additional amendments are going to be needed to make to this bill, made to this bill in order for the NDP to support it and for the Liberals to get it passed through the House of Commons. But if there's one thing for certain, it's that things are certainly heating up when it comes to Bill C-10. We're seeing a huge onslaught of Conservatives come out on Twitter and on their individual platforms against this Bill C-10, and I think it's going to be something that we're going to be hearing about a lot over the next little while. So if you want to stay up to date with it, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, because whenever there's a change or a vote on this issue, I'm going to bring you that information right here on the channel. And this all has me curious also. What do you think about all of this? Do you think that this is an attack on Canadians' rights and freedoms to make the posts they want? Do you think that maybe this is a little bit overblown in that this conservative stance that the government could use this to take down our individual posts, well, that it may not be entirely accurate or the actual intent of the bill? No matter which way you land on this, I like to stay right down the middle as much as I can whenever I'm bringing you this information. So whatever you think about it, you're welcome here. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I read every single one and I try to reply to as many as I can. And of course, check out the link in the description where you can get 45% off with coupon code INVEST on the Canada Money Mastery Program, where we teach everything about money that you should have been taught back in high school, how to save more, earn more, and invest more. So if you're interested in that, check out that coupon code for 45% off. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video has helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.
This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.